It's easy to romanticize the jazz age, glittering flapper dresses, prohibited speakeasies, and the exciting emergence of a new kind of music. Jazz, a style brewed from grounds of liberation and improvisation, is emotive and expressive, collaborative yet individual. Its varying styles and emphasis on improv have collectively been described as the sounds of freedom, offering young musicians aesthetic freedom from the arbitrary constraints of classical and popular music. Such appearances of freedom and spontaneity, however, overshadow the realities of jazz as a challenging music form and disguise the obsessiveness that often underlays the pursuit of artistic mastery and fame. It is this story of obsessiveness and ambition, this cold departure from how jazz was intended to be, that is distilled in Damien Chazelle's 2014 film, Whiplash. The film follows the story of jazz drummer Andrew Naiman, his aspirations to achieve the level of fame of jazz greats like Art Blakey and Buddy Rich, and his relationship with conductor Terrence Fletcher, whose teaching practices blur the line between instruction and abuse. Many scenes of the film collectively establish the thematic contrast between the form of jazz and Andrew's anxious, sadomasochistic behavior as a result of his toxic relationship with Fletcher. Andrew and the film are introspective, concerned with only Andrew's thoughts, emotions, and desires. This effect is achieved through rhythmic, sharp cuts between shots that feature what Andrew is noticing and acknowledging: reed soaking, bass strumming, sax cleaning, and casual flirting. Because Andrew is detached from the social scene, his experience and the experience of the audience are limited by his subjectivity. Is this hyper-focus on individuality and detachment from others characteristic of jazz? The short answer is no. The long answer requires an analysis of the intersection between collaboration and improv. A study conducted by Won-Jun Chung and Lucas Lacerda used famous jazz trumpeter Miles Davis's Kind of Blue album as a case study for effective improvisational collaboration. Chung and Lacerda's research highlights the importance of collaboration for individual improv. Through careful observation of a jazz jam session, the study found that impromptu and serendipitous musical ideas are created through collective activities by interacting with other musicians, and that jazz musicians collaborate together in sync rather than in conflict. This research brings to light an important contrast between Andrew and the form of jazz. Although the brilliance of jazz performance often depends on collaboration between players, Andrew purposely isolates himself from his musical peers. In fact, there are few interactions between Andrew and his bandmates that are not infused with a sense of toxic, individualistic competitiveness that reflects the atmosphere of anxiety created by Fletcher's extreme ideals. Through Andrew and Fletcher's relationship, Chazelle redefines the master-apprentice trope showcased in many popular film franchises like Star Wars, Harry Potter, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, and The Karate Kid. This is accomplished in the film as early as the opening scene. The audience watches a black screen as silence bleeds into the sound of a single-stroke roll. The sharp crack that caps this militaristic rumble is perfectly timed with the reveal of the scene. Tension builds as the camera slowly crawls towards Andrew sitting behind a drum set at the end of a long, green-tinged, dimly lit corridor. Fletcher's character is visually established as he slithers into the light from total darkness, wearing black clothing as Andrew wears white. Andrew anxiously moves across his drum set as Fletcher stands still. Fletcher is brash in his commentary and makes a sudden departure. Andrew's perceived failure crystallizes in a look of disappointment. This early scene offers glimpses of Andrew and Fletcher's personalities, how Andrew's underlying anxiety fosters his obsessive ambition, and how Fletcher's commanding presence of power and strength is crafted to emphasize his authority and capture Andrew's attention. The audience witnesses Fletcher immediately drawing Andrew into his sphere of influence, Andrew developing an intense desire to receive Fletcher's approval, Andrew failing to achieve this goal, and the undertone of dominance and submission that pervades the film. The power dynamic between Andrew and Fletcher has curious implications for Andrew's personal life. In fact, the few times that Andrew expresses joy are related in some capacity to receiving crumbs of affirmation from Fletcher. For example, after being invited to join Fletcher's studio band, Andrew rides the high of his euphoria by asking Nicole, his movie theater crush, on a date. The connection between Fletcher's words and Andrew's actions demonstrates the control Fletcher has not only over Andrew's music career while at school, but his mental state and emotional stability. Fletcher's approval, in the eyes of Andrew, is equitable to the artistic mastery that he desperately desires. The quest for this approval motivates Andrew's obsessiveness and serves to reinvent his identity. And, gradually, it does. The mood of the film shifts to encompass Andrew's changing identity, and his self-imposed isolation deepens. Fast-paced drum patterns like the rapid beat of a racing heart compose the background track of Andrew's practice sessions. The sound swells and builds, his hands blister and bloody. Music occupies his every thought and conversation. He has difficulty connecting to others, but is not bothered by his social shortcomings. He sits at the dinner table with his family, who show little interest in his drumming. The conversation quickly becomes strained as Andrew's uncle questions his lifestyle, asking,
"Got any friends, Andy?"
To which Andrew replies,
"No, I don't know. I just never really saw the use."
Echoing a sentiment Fletcher shared about Charlie Parker to justify dying
Drunk, broke at 34 and have people at a dinner table talk about me, then live to be rich and sober at 90 and nobody remember who I was.
Andrew's tunnel vision blinds him from objective reality and skews his metrics of success. His intensifying obsession and transforming identity are symbolized by his external appearance. He discards white t-shirts in favor of black, emotionlessly breaks up with Nicole, and further isolates himself. He is alone, a solitary protagonist concerned only with his singular, focalized reality of achieving success, that is, receiving Fletcher's approval. In this sense, Fletcher personifies a perverse interpretation of jazz, one that values nothing short of perfection. He exploits the absolute control he has over Andrew and cultivates his transforming identity. Their dynamic is not collaborative, but twisted and combative, a direct contradiction of an important jazz principle. After tackling Fletcher on stage, Andrew is expelled from Schaefer and contributes evidence to a case against Fletcher to get him fired. At this point, the film could come to a reasonable end. Andrew's dad spares his son from an obscure fate, an evil teacher loses his power, and all is right in the world. But Chazelle pushes his story past expectations. Andrew happens to stumble into a bar that Fletcher is performing at. The two sit down to have a drink. Andrew, dressed once again in lighter colors, is visibly anxious. Despite no longer possessing actual authority over Andrew, Fletcher retains his implied power and maintains control of the conversation. The camera moves closer to the characters' faces as the conversation intensifies. The subjective focalization and creative cinematography of the film allow the audience to see the exact moment Andrew is drawn back into Fletcher's sphere of influence, when Fletcher uses the story of Charlie Parker to validate his teaching methods.
There are no two words in the English language more harmful than good job.
When Fletcher says there is no line at which the next Charlie Parker would get discouraged, Andrew and the audience believes him. And when Fletcher invites Andrew to play with his new ensemble, he accepts. Andrew dons black. On stage, Fletcher exposes his plot to set Andrew up for public embarrassment. The color grading intensifies and shifts from yellow to blue. Andrew's goal has also shifted. He is detached and passionately self-centered, but in a primal way very much unlike the coolness of jazz. He breaks out in a maniacal improvised solo, the sights of his obsessive determination narrowing around the goal of defeating his enemy. Fletcher turns around in confusion and consents to the madness. It is an exhilarating whirl. Andrew sees blood, but Fletcher sees opportunity, realizing that he's creating his next Charlie Parker. He exploits the absolute control he has over Andrew and physically molds his solo with his hand like a god. Slower, slower, faster, faster. Andrew's father watches his unrecognizable, animalistic son with horror. In a brilliant use of extreme close-up, Andrew and Fletcher are shown smiling. They have reached an equilibrium in which Fletcher has remade Andrew in his likeness. By conveying Andrew's obsession with achieving an uncompromising vision of success, Chazelle creates a coming-to-age narrative in which a boy develops not into a man, but a monster. Analyzing the development of jazz and the relationship between creativity, collaboration, and compromise emphasizes how jazz was intended to be compared to how jazz is portrayed through Andrew and Fletcher's subverted master-apprentice dynamic in Whiplash. Whiplash is a rich film of depth with intensity to match that of the hidden reality it emulates. A film that combines family dynamics, abusive interactions, and a complex discussion about the challenges associated with the world of competitive and professional music. A film that causes viewers to ponder the startling psychological implications of the challenges of musicianship and the connection between art making, depression, substance abuse, and stardom.